Hi. I'm going to quickly just present to you my project from last year. It's called Anti-Alias Regular. It's a typeface I designed. And I started this project from my initial research and inspiration from Wim Crowell's alphabet. New alphabet, and just researching about monospaced typography and how it evolved with time and with the advent of computer graphics and high definition displays. In my research, I came across this anti-alias technique, which is used in computer graphics, and this is just a quick quote from Wikipedia. So basically, it's a software technique for diminishing jagged lines that should be smooth. These lines occur because the output device, the monitor or printer, does not have a high enough resolution to represent the smooth line. So this technique reduces the prominence of stair-step-like lines by surrounding the stair-step with shades of gray. So this is, I guess, all of you know what it looks like. This is just showing you the difference with the letter O. And when I started to work on my own typeface, I decided to come up with a structure that is basically 6 building blocks, varying in width of lines and density of the lines, so that this way I could work around the software that I used that didn't allow me to create different opacities. So with this, I still used glyph strips. And this is just 3 letters out of the typeface I came up with. The basic structure of it. This is a specimen and some letters and numbers. And then I continued and created a type specimen poster. Just wanted to have fun with what I came up with. And it was in the form of a folder that could open up and sort of, you could play around with the different scales. And here it was really important for me to show the quality of the structure of the typeface. And also experiment with what it looks like when it's really tiny or when it's really blown up. And then I tried to find a pre-existing grid in a room to sort of put my letter on the floor and see how it creates a whole different experience. And the last thing I did with it, I made a website, which is basically an algorithm running with JavaScript that generates random sentences. Often they are kind of strange because it pulls up from arrays of nouns, verbs, adjectives, adverbs, and creates these weird sentences. So this is kind of my take on using a program and creating something new for the screen. So yeah, thank you.
Did it. Okay, so just going to go quickly. I know that you've been sitting here and just give me 1 second. And you've seen what we have here at the club. I just want to remind everybody that we have our big opening on July 12th for TDC 62 and the TDC 2016 typeface winners. So if you're in the city and you'd love to come, it's a great event, and we look forward to having everybody. So, onward. Okay, I gotta get rid of that. Just bear with me a minute. You know when you try to get rid of something and it keeps popping up? Okay, guys, I messed up. Okay.
Everything's fine.
I just put it on. Okay. That's true.
And it's on already.
It is okay. Okay, so as I said earlier, I've been with TDC for 33 years, and actually, counting the years has been fun only because I've been able to meet so many people, and I've really been both privileged and humbled to be able to meet and make acquaintances with many of the great and distinguished type designers and type lovers around the world. I first met Adrian Frutiger at the Type Directors Club conference, Type 1987. We awarded Adrian the TDC medal that year, and he was the 13th recipient since Herman Zoff received it in 1967. If you're curious, the gentleman standing next to Adrian, not me, because I'm not a gentleman, but next to Adrian, that's Roger Black. So I know many of you know Roger, so that was Roger 30 years ago. So this is one of, it really, besides my children and my grandchildren, this is one of my most precious photographs. It's in my office, and I have classes and visiting around the world. I do a presentation about the club. When they come into my office, though, I always show them the photograph that my husband Alan took in 1998 in Lyon, France at A-Type when Adrian was just about to give me a kiss. So, what could be more precious than that? Then, when we were celebrating, the TDC was celebrating its 65th anniversary, Diego Vanesman, past president, he had an idea that we should do a Celebrate 65 book. And 65 type designers and graphic designers were asked to give us a number 1 to 65. And Diego, I had no idea how he came up with these numbers, but Herman Zoff, he got 65. And then he gave Adrian 63. But somebody had to ask Adrian to do the number. So I called Akira Kobayashi, who worked, he's type director, for then Linotype, now Monotype. And I asked Akira if he could ask Adrian for me to do the number. And he called me back a few days later, and he said to me that he did speak to Adrian, who was in a nursing home, and Adrian said he would do it for Carol. Of course, if you know me, I cried for quite a while. So this is the number 63. So you might be asking, well, who's number 64 then? Well, Diego said that the two oldest people in the book were both Adrian and Herman. Herman was the oldest, that's why he was 65. And actually, he put Jessica Hish in the center of between the two of them, because she was the youngest. And that, to me, was an amazing compliment, to be in between two of the greatest type designers. So now, I know what you're all waiting for, and I will not waste any more time. Matthew Carter. I found this Matthew in the archives, and I just love it, with you sticking out there and the TDC. I mean, what could be more appropriate? So without further ado, I'm going to introduce a TDC member, the 1997 TDC medalist, is Matthew Carter. He's a principal of Carter and Cone Type and in Cambridge, Massachusetts. And he specializes in designing and producing original typefaces. But we all know that, right? So, Matthew Carter.
Can you get me set up? No.
No. All right. Okay.
Sorry. Carol.
Propeller out.
Yes.
Good. So here's the plan. Adrian was an enormously prolific designer, and not only of typefaces. I can't possibly cover everything in a talk like this. So what I plan to do is talk a little bit about his training, his background. And then instead of showing you, 50 slides of 50 typefaces, I will look at maybe just 3 or 4, but look at them in considerable depth. Try and find out how they came about. And then at the end, 1 or 2 personal reminiscences and some pictures and anecdotes and so on. So I hope that's all right. Adrian died on September 10th of last year in Bern, in Switzerland. He was 87. He was born in Unterseen, near Interlaken, in the same canton, Bern, in the Swiss Alps, in other words. He was the son of a weaver. I've never been able to find anything woven by his father, but I wanted to show you this. This is an example of the folk art from the region where the Frutigers came from. These are made by, ordinary folk. They're paper cutouts, very meticulous, done really as a sort of a hobby, I suppose. And Adrian thought that he was very familiar with these from his childhood, and he thought that this business of sort of black and white and this meticulous presentation was really in his genes and accounted for a lot of what happened in his life afterwards. Adrian, there are going to be a lot of digressions in this talk, and here comes one already. Adrian told me that when he was a kid, he was often late for school because at the breakfast table, he would take some bread and he would take some butter and put the butter on the bread. And then there'd be a bit of butter left over. So he'd have to have a bit more bread. And then there'd be a bit of bread left over. But I'm the designer in him had got the bread and the butter both exactly lined up. He was late for school. But, designers have certain priorities. This is understandable. So after a local apprenticeship to a compositor, Adrian entered the Kunstgewerbeschule in Zurich, the art and craft school in Zurich, where he became especially receptive to the teaching of 2 people, Alfred Willemann and Walter Keich. Under their instruction, he made rubbings of classical inscriptions, wrote calligraphic studies with a broad-nibbed pen, drew the spaces inside and between letters with white paint on black paper to understand the importance of counterforms in type, and as his final project at the school, produced an 18-page portfolio to illustrate the historical development of the Latin script by cutting letters with a knife in the long grain of beechwood. These are not engravings, they are cuts in the plank. I won't show you all of them, but here are a few. Do you ever see a student do work like this? These are from the originals. His friend Eric Alp, who I'll mention more than once, did a new edition of these in which the grain is rather subdued. Hello. Oh. Yeah, this is the same plate as the last one, but you see it's kind of cleaned up. I actually prefer these grainy ones. Because I don't speak German. I thought I'd better put these names on a slide so that you can see what I'm butchering. Williman and Keck, I think it's pronounced. This is a typeface called Herculanum, designed by Adrian, part of a project that he initiated, I think, with Linotype, called Letters Before Gutenberg. And this, I think he did 3 or 4 in this series, and other designers contributed as well. So this was the typeface. Here is the woodcut that was the origin of it, and 40 years elapsed between these two things, 1950, 1990. He sent this, he sent this portfolio around. It came to the attention of Charles Peignot at the de Berny-Peignot foundry in Paris, who hired Adrian on the strength of it in 1952. I'm not sure when this photograph was taken, between the wars, I would guess 1920s. It's a meeting of type founders, sort of precursor of A-Type I. I can only recognize 1 or 2, but the one on the extreme left is Charles Peignot, a very dapper young man. It's the spats that really get you, isn't it? So, the business of the de Berny-Peignot foundry was the traditional one of casting type in metal, but under the far-sighted management of Charles, this fellow, it undertook also the design and manufacture of fonts for the new technology of the Lumitype Photon photocomposing machine. It was called Photon in this country and Lumitype or Lumitype in Europe, same machine. For metal casting, Adrian designed, I think, 2 or 3 faces, a set of initials called Président for business cards, and the very vigorous script face called Ondine, which I really like very much. He did this by cutting the letters out of black paper, not by drawing them. Familiar technique of his. My friend Darrell Hyder, letterpress printer in Massachusetts, has Ondine in the case, in the metal, and he printed this very nice keepsake. At the urging of Rémy Peignot, who was Charles' son, another designer who had an office in the studio, Adrian turned his attention from display faces like this one to his first text face, Meridian. It would be hard to find a type design in which the intercharacter spacing had been more carefully studied than in Meridian. These are my much-loved specimens of Meridian. You may see that the middle one, the semi-bold, is a little bit more worn than the others. That's because it's my favorite in the series. This is typical of Adrian. These are letters from Meridian. And he was always trying to relate typography to the wider world, other things in life. So you see here positive and negative, showing the counters and the intercharacter spacing. And down the bottom, some similar examples from life, male and female figures, trees in the woods, and so on. He was always trying to find a connection between, the very focused world of typography and other things that surround us. Yeah, this is not mine. Eric Alp sent me this. You see at the top, if you make the bottom of a serif flat, it looks as though it's bulging, it's sagging, like someone with fallen arches with flat feet. But if you dish the bottom of the serif slightly, it looks like a normal foot. So this is, again, the kind of thing that Adrian was fond of. Here is the semi-bold of Meridian. Beautiful typeface. Here you see, I made this slide just to make, here's some century face in the top and Meridian down below. Notice how the forms of A, C, E, and S, in particular in century, are very enclosed. The counters are very enclosed. There's a very different relationship between those letters and their neighboring letters than in Meridian down below, which the letters are much more open. They sort of embrace the letter next to them. This really amounts to a theory of legibility, I think. and it recurs in Adrian's work. So, to equip the Lumitype machine, it was necessary to adapt for photocomposition the standard commercial library of types, Baskerville, Garamond, Bodoni, and so on. For a sans serif, the obvious choice was a face called Europe, which was de Berny-Peño's version of Futura, and the very best-selling typeface. But Adrian's training in Zurich in humanistic letterforms left him very unsympathetic to the strict geometry of the Futura model. As a student, he had made some preliminary designs for a sans serif in which Keich's influence was manifest. Without knowing how his boss in Paris would react to an alternative proposal, Adrian went back to his student project and hurriedly added child characters to a whole family of weights and widths, as you see here. Charles Peña, who loved anything new and original, gave the sans serif his blessing, and he came up with its ambitious name, Univers. It was released in metal and Lumitype in 1957 to immediate success. Univers really made Adrian's reputation internationally. He was 29. This is accidents grotesque. This is you might call it the reigning sans serif in post-war Europe. It was actually a 19th century face, but it was what all the leading Swiss graphic designers in the after-war period used in their typography. Look at how the C and the G and the S in the caps and the C and the E and the S in the lowercase, they have the terminals sliced off at an oblique angle, whereas the A and the G in the lowercase, they're kind of horizontal. We know, because they said so, that the people at Haas, when they developed Helvetica, intended it as an improvement of this face of accidents. This was their starting point for Hoffman and Medinger. This is a detail from a very extraordinary book by Walter Keich, one of the teachers at Zurich, which Eric Alp found for me, sent me 7 or 8 years ago, and it's his note, it's Eric's note here, saying, basic for Univers, and then by Adrian Frutiger, Emil Ruder, in an optical better way improved. You get what he means. The significance of this little illustration of these two O's is, if you take a round O and you condense it, it becomes an oval. And Keich hated that. He maintained that particularly a very condensed O should have straight sides. And this is really, you're looking at the germ of the whole idea of Univers right here. Another detail from this same extraordinary book where Keich has drawn horizontal lines to show you how the terminals are sliced off. Another page from the same book with again a note from Eric saying, mix of Neuer-Haas grotesque, in other words, Helvetica and Univers, 1949. This book was produced 8 years before Helvetica or Univers saw the light of day. It's all here. Look at this. Here's the bulb. This is Adrian's study that he made of school of sans serif. It's a piece of paper with some photo prints stuck on it and some scrawled notes in pencil from Adrian. And down the bottom you'll see it says, this is only to amuse you. My first drawings of Univers made in Zurich in 1950, in other words, when he was still a student. Up above, study for book face, incidentally, that looks an awful lot like an early version of Meridian to me. Here is that same selection of sans serif letters, although now at the bottom it's attributed to Keich. I don't think that's right. I think this was Adrian's work. Although, it's sometimes difficult to sort of disentangle teacher and student. It's like Rudolf Koch and Bertolt Wampe. Sometimes hard to tell where one ends and the next begins. But I think this is Adrian's work. So yeah, I'm sort of belaboring the point, but here are the great Swiss grots, Helvetica and Univers, with their horizontal terminals. And this is, again, this is Univers. This is the whole diagrammatic structure of this 21-piece family. This is implied by that. Okay, if you start from this, you get that. And this is Adrian spelling it out for me one day in the studio in, I guess, 1963. Top left is an accidents like a C, and then on the right-hand side is the universe like C and some other letters and so on. I always kept these noodles that we did together when he was explaining various things. Universe was still in work when I was in the studio in those years. So part of the project of Univers was to sort of bring some order to a very disordered situation. Up the top, you see a whole lot of ends from different foundry sans serifs of the time. Then this diagram in the middle, and down the bottom ends from the Univers series, Roman, italic, different weights, and so on, in a very orderly presentation. Here's that slide I showed you before. I'm actually not completely sure that it was this piece of paper that Adrian showed to Charles Peño, but if not, it was something very similar to it. This is an early state of a much more familiar view of the same matrix, which is this. I strongly suspect the influence of Emil Ruder here. Ruder was not in Zurich. He never taught Adrian. He was in Basel. But he was very kind to Adrian when Adrian was a student. And you know, Ruder was the great apostle of the grid in Swiss post-war design. And it's easy to see how I think his influence could have been very important to Adrian in organizing this very orderly presentation of the weights and widths and italics of Univers. I mean, this is more or less a guess on my part, but it's a sort of informed guess, if you like. Yeah, here's a whole stampede of different Universes. There were two drawings for Univers, one for metal, one for film, for the Lumitype. This is a film drawing. It had to have these crotches opened up, because the Lumitype, the source of the font in the Lumitype was a spinning disk. And the letters were captured, frozen by a high-intensity flash. But there was always a slight blur, a slight trailing edge on the letter. And that had a very deleterious effect on letters such as the W, which had converging strokes, crotches, and so on. So we used a rather inelegant term of bitten crotches. We had to open up the crotches and then put these little spurs at the top where there were obtuse angles to sort of buttress them, because again, the exposure, the photographic exposure in the machine tended to round those. So this is a form of compensation. I mean, I can't say that every single letter was drawn twice. I mean, cap I was probably good for both, but any letter that had junctions of strokes in it had to be drawn twice for the entire 21-piece series. I think this is Paul's slide, isn't it? There were two ampersands for Univers. The upper one, Adrian's typical ET, and the more familiar one, conventional one down at the bottom. You know, type geeks consider this a cop-out, and they blame Adobe because this conventional ampersand is in the Adobe fonts, but I'm not sure that they are actually originally to blame. I think this may go back to the point when ATF started selling metal type of Univers in this country. And they probably looked at that ampersand and said, you know, we can't sell this to Americans, kindly give us a proper ampersand. By the time Adrian got around to doing Econe in '78, he kind of faced up to the inevitable. You'll see top right-hand corner, he's done both forms of ampersand here. His own favourite ET and the more conventional one. So here you see Adrian, photograph taken when the Frutigers had moved back to Bern. Bremgarten is just outside the city of Bern. And you see, Adrian's working on the new version of Univers, which Linotype commissioned, and which he was delighted to do because, you know, over the years, Univers had become rather corrupted. And also, I think they added a couple of extra weights. Do you see how on the drawing board in front of Adrian, the letters are kind of cut up? Adrian worked as much with scissors as with a pen and pencil. I've seen him do it. Sometimes his drawings look like a sort of patchwork, you know, bits of letters taped together and so on. Design was a very tactile thing for Adrian, always. This is Walter Keich, the very influential teacher, making a rubbing of an inscription, as you see. Here is this book, which I showed you some examples of, which I thought was so significant. It's a wonderful book. It's huge, and it's a ring binder. These pages are printed on cardstock, on one side only, so students can, you know, dismantle the book and pass these around and so on. I only got to see this book for the first time when Eric found me a copy. I guess I was 70. If I'd known this book when I was 20, I'd probably be a much better designer now, because there are things in here which are amazing. I should say that Keich drew entirely freehand. He wouldn't use straight edges or compass or French curves or anything. He believed in completely freehand drawing, which makes all these pages, I'm only showing you, a few, there's a great thick book, makes it even more remarkable in my opinion. So in 1962, in order to expand his work from type to other forms of graphic design, Adrian opened his own studio at the La Vache Noire in the south of Paris, not terribly far from the foundry. He was joined there by two colleagues from Switzerland, Bruno Pfäffli and André Görtler. So his time after then was divided between de Berny-Peño, the Atelier Frutiger, and teaching. He taught very regularly. So this photograph was taken at a party in 1962 to celebrate the opening of the studio. The little girl, bottom left, is Annick, who was 4. And Sylvie in the middle was 6, and Stefan, the boy, was 8. Stefan was was Adrian's son by his first wife, Paulette, who died in childbirth. So Simone, who you see here, was his second wife, and the mother of the 2 girls. I never saw Simone in her national costume, which she's wearing here. I wish I had. It looks very charming. And behind them is some rather national-looking food you see at this party. Yeah, I should sort of explain that in '63, I went to work at Crossfield Electronics in London, who were the manufacturing agents of the photon lumitype machine. They made the machines, but they did not make the fonts. All the fonts were made at de Berny-Peño in Paris. So, and all of them were custom made. There were no sort of off-the-shelf fonts. These discs had all been, customers said what fonts they wanted on the disc. I had to help them decide that, and then I had to go to Paris and get the discs made. And if we didn't have a typeface, I had to produce it. I mean, I remember doing a Greek and a classified ad face because we had customers who wanted those things. So I reckon I spent at least, 1 or 2 weeks out of every month in Paris. Very agreeable gig. But it brought me into contact with Adrian, not every day, because he didn't come in every day after he opened his own studio, but I saw him very often. Sometimes I also went to the studio. So our friendship dates from those days. In the years that followed the opening of the studio. By the way, another slide of names, because I've probably mangled these in trying to pronounce them for you. This is what I meant to say. In the years that followed, Adrian undertook an astonishing variety of projects. He made an adaptation of Univers for the IBM Composer golf ball typewriter. He designed a machine-readable and human-readable typeface, OCRB, for use on checks. He taught at the National Institute of Design in Ahmedabad in India, from which came the design of a sort of Univers-flavoured Devanagari typeface. The culture of India and the designers he worked with there really retained a very special place in Adrian's heart. He was very fond of India. And, you know, Adrian spoke good English, and he said that he mostly learnt it in India, and you could sometimes detect that. In 1970, Adrian was asked to undertake the design of signs for the new Paris airport at Roissy. It's since been renamed Charles de Gaulle in honor of someone or other. At first, it was assumed by Adrian and by the architects. What? Easier said than done. What was I saying? Yeah, it was assumed by the architects and by Adrian when he first got this job that Univers would be used for the signs at the airport. But when he'd looked at Univers, you know, with dummy signs in the distance and so on, he realized that those very enclosed forms with their horizontal terminals were not well suited for this particular application. In other words, Univers was good for reading, but not so good for reference. And there's obviously an important difference. This typeface, a different sans serif with more open forms called Concord, it was Adrian's design, but it was largely drawn by André Goertler, worked better, tested better. It was designed, Concord was designed for a firm called Sofratype in France in 1964. Sofratype made slug machine matrices, which is what you see, these gold things in a cascade here. This is a beautiful specimen. I have more than one copy of this. I liked it so much. Designed by Bruno Pfeffli. So, as I say, drawn very, very largely by André Goertler. You know, type designers are well known for their work ethic, and here we see, this was one of our type selection meetings up at a house of Mike Parker's in Western Massachusetts in Coleraine. Well, Mike and Aldo Novarese and I are sitting down. Andre is the one who's actually lying down, so you see him there. And here are the Frutigers and the Goertlers at a very much later date, at I guess some anniversary celebration for Adrian. So the Roissy alphabet, essentially a slightly bolder and more widely spaced version of Concord, was adopted for the airport and for road signs immediately around it. Some of you here, including well-trained typographers, might be surprised that a typeface designed for 8-point on newsprint, which was what Concord was designed for, should provide a good model for signs at huge size in an airport. But this would not surprise James Montalbano, Margaret Calvert, John Downer, or me, come to that. There is a paradoxical affinity between typefaces for very large sizes and typefaces for very small sizes, because of the very inhospitable environment for legibility that they both occupy. You know, you never see a sign for the first time in an ideal situation. It's in the distance, it's an angle, you're coming around a corner, it's at night, you're driving past at 70 miles an hour, or whatever it is. I'm right about this, aren't I, James? Yes, thank you. And furthermore, it sort of cuts both ways. You know, a few years ago, I designed a face for Yale University that exists in two forms: print, ordinary uses, and one we call street, which is for signs on campus, you know, names on buildings and directional signs, no parking, all that sort of thing. Well, the other day, the printer at the university, John Gamble, told me that when he has to set very small captions, he does not use the print face, he uses the sign face. Isn't that interesting? He's a very good typographer. Here's a series of slides, 2 or 3 slides, that show the work that went into selecting the typeface for the signs at the airport. On the left, you see some serif faces that were rejected. On the right, I guess that's Helvetica at the top. What is this folio in the middle, maybe? And a Univers down at the bottom. So they decided on a sans serif, looking at a geometrical one, at Univers. But down at the bottom, the last three are really the direction that they followed. Two different weights, and then at the bottom, the heavier weight tracked out, spaced out. Very important in terms of the legibility of the signs. And here they're sort of testing to the point of destruction, simulating, looking, seeing something right in the distance. And on the left, usual typeface, you might say, Helvetica or Univers, with the more enclosed counters, and on the right, the Concord-like open counters. And you can see how much longer those open counters survive as you degrade the image. On the left, you can see these E's and S's and things are all blocking in, but on the right, they remain much more legible. So, this kind of destruction testing was very important. I love this stuff. I mean, this is not inspiration or anything. It's just working it, You work through this and you come up with the right answer. I love it. Some questions about individual forms. I think the third one, the third Y, was the one they picked. I think they were right, don't you? Yeah. So this is the Rasi alphabet, just played out. I forgot to say that those trials of typefaces for the signs, obviously they inform the Adrian and the people responsible for the signs. They also make sure that the architects are on board. There's some politics in a thing like that. You have to make sure that, because the architects are ultimately responsible for the building and everything that goes into it, so you have to sort of bring them along at the same time. I'm ashamed to tell you, I do not have good colour slides of the signs at Charles de Gaulle, and I couldn't find any online either. Next time I'm there, I'll take some myself. But the background is yellow, a tint very carefully chosen in order that the letters in black, French, and in white, in English, are equally contrasted. This doesn't make the point. I find I have the correspondence between Adrian and Mike Parker that led to the creation of Frutiger, the sans serif type that has Adrian's name. I'm not sure why I have it. I'm probably not supposed to have it, but I do, so we can look at it. Mike had shown an interest in Concord, not as slug machine mats, but as a potential photocomposition face. Concord came out, as I said, in '64. So this is a letter from Adrian to Mike in March of 1970, thanking Mike for his interest in Concord, and saying, it's not possible for me today to tell you exactly what my intentions are in regard to this sans serif typeface. In my imagination, it was always a matter of making a sans serif face that was very neutral, a little in the vein of Gill, but with a less classical aspect, less classical appearance. Concord, as it is now, has become perhaps a little bit too impersonal. And I'm wondering whether it would be enough to simply correct certain letters in order to give it a new appearance, a new allure. And that's the last sentence that I think is absolutely key here. Adrian says, because I have other ideas for sans serif faces. I think this is the first glint, the first gleam in Adrian's eye of a sans serif beyond Concord, in other words, Frutiger. 1 year later, 1971, I send you here enclosed 2 first proofs of the alphabet Rasi. The relationship between Concord and this new alphabet certainly exists in the general area, but Rasi realization is quite new and adequate to the legibility of architectural typography. Nevertheless, it could be possible that this study may be interesting for the typographical area. Well, This is what Adrian enclosed with that letter. It is dry transfer lettering, which is how they made the signs for the airport. So this was our first view of the Rusty face. Here it is. Here's a sheet of letraset. Unlike much dry transfer lettering, you see there are little marks for the side bearings, for the spacing, and the vowels have a center mark for aligning the accents. So here we are, 1974, and now we are really talking contracts. You know, Adrian says, I always thought that in the range of Rusty alphabet, there is a possibility for a typeface, perhaps of family, not so big as Univers. He didn't want to design 21 Frutigers. And then we get into contracts and so on. You see at the top Mike's handwriting, discussed with Matt Carter. I don't think it was a very long discussion because Mike would probably have said to me, you know, I think I'm going to sign this contract with Adrian, commission him to design new sans serif. And I probably would have said, go for it, you know. Why wouldn't you do that? So I'm sorry if this is sort of too much inside baseball, but I think it's important to understand that Adrian did not sit down on a Monday morning and just design Frutiger. There were a lot of things that went into it. Different influences, different typefaces, precursors to it, and so on. Here is a spread, rather ordinary type specimen spread of Frutiger. And again, here's I showed you the top two here, the century-like face and meridian. Down below, Univers and Frutiger. Same difference. Notice these enclosed counters in Univers and the open ones in Frutiger. It's interesting to me that, you know, as I said, when they were testing for legibility at the airport, Adrian decided that Univers, you know, was good for reading, but not so good for reference. That the Concord model was better for reference. Any of you who've used or read Frutiger, the typeface, will probably conclude, as I have, that it is good both to read and to refer to. In other words, there's an argument, I think, for saying that this form at the bottom of a sans serif has, you know, some advantages over the other ones in that, you know, it's a sort of double threat. You can read it very well. You can also refer to it when legibility is, rather than readability, is the issue. Again, I love this stuff. So Frutiger, the typeface, was adopted for the French highway signs. I hope Adrian didn't see this one because the spacing has come unstuck one or two places. If you look at the word route, bottom right, T has come adrift. Not good. So, by the way, a decade elapsed between Concord, 64, Frutiger, sort of 74, 76. You know, it occurs to me that this talk is as much about the spaces between letters as it is about letters. And that's not an accident. Mozart said, the music is not in the notes, but in the silence between. Debussy said, music is the space between the notes. Mozart and Debussy would have made really excellent type designers. I think their talents were wasted. So I showed you that slide before. Yeah, disappointing application. You know, by the way, much of the workload that Adrian took on designing Frutiger, he delegated to another Swiss designer, Hans-Jörg Hunziger. Hans-Jörg had worked with me at Mergenthaler for 3 or 4 years in Brooklyn. We worked very happily together on a number of designs before he moved back to Europe and went to work for Adrian in Paris. The decision to give the new sans serif family the name of Frutiger was taken partly for legal reasons, but it seems appropriate. Although it was Univers that initially made Adrian's reputation, it was the sans serif that has his name that he admitted was his favourite. It reminded him of the work of Brancusi, his favourite artist. He said, "I've got lots of slides of Brancusi, but I couldn't decide on one single one to use to sort of sum him up. So close your eyes for a second and think of your favourite Brancusi." Adrian is, of course, best known as a peerless designer of sans serif types, but he was equally at home among the serifs. His designs amount to a conspectus of virtually every style of text type in which the Latin alphabet has found expression. In the years after Charles Peña was no longer in charge of his foundry, no longer Adrian's chief patron, Adrian designed for other clients, Serifa for Bauer, Iridium, Econe, Bruegel, Versailles, Linotype Centennial, Linotype Dido, two more sans serif families, Avenir and Vectora, all designed for Stempel German Linotype. A very fruitful relationship with Linotype that continued after the Frutigers moved back to their native Bern after living in Paris for 40 years. And that relationship lasted until the end of Adrian's life, latterly with the collaboration of Akira Kobayashi. Adrian was very, very well served by assistants, Andre and Hans-Jörg and Akira, wonderful designers in their own right. I've sort of shortchanged Adrian by not showing all of their types in a way, but those you can see elsewhere. What is harder to see is things like this. These are Adrian's designs that were not produced. These are never-mades. And again, bits of photographs stuck on a piece of paper with Adrian's scrawl in pencil. Copperplate Gothic with lowercase alphabet at the top. Haussmann, 1950. This must have been student work. He was still in school in 1950. Down at the bottom, this is frustrating. This is also a project for the Lumitype, a Jensen face. I never saw this before, 1955, never made. I don't know why not. It looks very elegant to me, but it was never made for the Lumitype library. Here are some more. A sans serif, sort of morphing into a script with alternative letters of different widths. It's rather fashionable now to have letters of different widths within the same typeface, I guess, thanks to OpenType. Here's Adrian doing it as a student in 1950. Note the very Frutigerian ampersand in the middle of that page. And it's difficult to see, but down the bottom it says idea for a half-joined script. Here's another page. I love this thing at the top, 53. This must also have been an idea for the Lumitype face, but again, never produced for some reason. The italic lower right, at least the lowercase, looks to me like a very early stage of Meridian italic. So perhaps that did lead to something, but the others I don't believe ever did. So this was, this is kind of frustrating that these wonderful ideas, for one reason or another, were never produced. Adrian's interest in graphic forms went well beyond the alphabet. He was fascinated by symbols, marks that meant something, signs, pictograms, precursors of writing in different cultures. He collected and codified historical examples and drew his own. He made this extraordinary thing. This is a colossal map of signs and symbols. It's huge. In case you were thinking of buying a copy of this, somebody told me the other day they'd looked for one, and with 8 books, they had one, but it cost $1,400. Get away from me. So this beautiful shape, very Adrian. It's not an illustration to Genesis, but there were some designs that accompanied the first chapter of Genesis, and also he did another one for the Song of Songs. He was a very accomplished designer of logotypes, as you can imagine from his fascination with symbols. You could do a whole talk on Adrian's logos. I just show you 2 pages of them. This is a very extraordinary thing. This is a piece of sculpture. I saw this in the yard at the studio. It's quite big. I mean, it's about the size of this rostrum. It consists of 2 horizontal panels, and then I think 4 vertical ones sort of radiating. It's made of sheets of slate that Adrian cut into patterns with a saw, and then sandwiched between them is white cement. Here's another view. You can perhaps see the lamination of it on the right-hand side. Well, Adrian told me he made 2 of these sculptures. The first one went straight into the Musée d'Art Moderne in Paris, the French National Museum of Modern Art. And the second one went into another big, it might have come to MoMA or, I don't know, but some other big national collection. So that's not a bad batting average to make 2 pieces of sculpture in your life and both of them go into major national collections straight away. Good going. One frequently got nice cards from Adrian and Simone. There are several openings of this, I'm just showing you one. Simone was interested in theology and the liturgy, Christian liturgy and so on. And these are 2, apparently there are certain colours associated with different seasons of the liturgy. I think the one on the left, the Alpha Omega, has to do with Christmas and at Easter, and the one on the right with, I guess, Advent. So I think Adrian must have liked this Alpha and Omega because this is a screen grab from a video somebody made of Adrian in his workroom in Bremgarten, and I see he has it up on the wall. You know, it's possible to trace a number of influences on Adrian as a designer. He felt an affinity with his father's work with woven textiles and his own with type on a printed page. He admired those black paper cutout decorations that were the folk art of his birthplace in the Bernese mountains. He owed obviously very much to the teaching of Willimann and Kach in Zurich, to the advice and friendship of Emil Ruder in Basel, to the confidence in him shown by Charles Peña in Paris, but in the end, Adrian Frutiger stands alone, sui generis. What he learned from history or from his schooling, he transmuted into something recognizable as uniquely his own. The letters he made, their stems, strokes, serifs, curves, counters, spaces, have the integrity of a singular vision. Eric Alp, who I've mentioned more than once, long-standing friend of Adrian's, said that Adrian was a designer with the equivalent of a musician's perfect pitch. His hand could not draw a bad line. You know, the passing of Adrian Frutiger and of Hermann Zapf, within weeks of each other last year, took from us the 2 giants of a critical period of typographic history, the transition from metal foundry type via the sort of interregnum of photo composition to the digital world we live in. It's extraordinary, really, that 2 designers, each as brilliant as any in the history of type, had the training and the aptitude to lead the way through a technical revolution with standards of design that never wavered. They designed different letters, Adrian and Hermann, but they had the same goal, to put before the reader typefaces, however they were made, whatever the technology was, that were as beautiful as they were functional. This is the family gravestone. That stone on top is one that Adrian found. He sort of carved some lines on it. He called it a mother and child, and it used to sit on the ground beside the gravestone. Adrian's younger brother, when Adrian's name was added to this stone last year, stuck this other stone on top of it where it looks completely ludicrous. So I will zoom in. I have not gone into the family history. It would be very painful to do so. The 2 daughters died at very early ages, as you can see. This is something that Adrian wrote a decade before his death. It's a sort of credo. I will read it to you. I set it in semi-bold of meridian. To all young type designers, dear friends, sometime in the future, you will feel the urge to design new typefaces, new alphabets. You will have good tools for that work. I'm thinking of your computer, which will be an enormous help. But don't be tempted to let the computer take over the design. Machines do not recognize aesthetics. I never had such advanced equipment in my time, so I always had to rely on my hand alone. What I cannot convey to you, however, is the new form of typefaces. Long after I'm gone, there will be a new sense for shapes, one that I cannot imagine now. Your sensitivity will help you find those new structures. I thank you for looking after the beauty of type. Well, one word jumped out at me the first time I read that, and every time I read it. It's the third word from the end. Nobody talks about the beauty of type. Several of you here can probably say the same thing that I can, that I can't count the number of times that I've been asked, what is the best typeface? What is the most popular typeface? What is your favorite typeface? What typeface would you take to a desert island? What typeface do you want on your gravestone? In 60 plus years, I've never once been asked, what is the most beautiful typeface? Or even, is there a beautiful typeface? Or even, is there beauty in typefaces? Can there be beauty in typefaces? Well, Adrian evidently thought so. It's that one quality of type, the beauty, that he thanks future generations of type designers for looking after. He sort of bequeaths to them a concern with the beauty of type. This is a favorite picture of Adrian and mine. It's out of focus, but it was taken in the Frutiger's country house, a former farmhouse, in a village near Chartres, about an hour and a quarter from Paris, where they spent weekends and vacations, and where we had one of our type selection meetings. Two things to point out to you in that picture. Do you see the lampshade hanging up top there? It's one of those Chinese paper and bamboo spherical shades, lanterns, that they fold, they collapse flat. Well, Adrian bought that in New York, and he had it under his arm when we took him to the airport. So I asked him about it. And what he said was, in the end, I find the simplest things are the best. There's another very simple thing in that table. You can't see it for all the bottles and glasses and so on. It's that table made by a local carpenter. And it's a single huge slab of oak. It's 4 or 5 inches thick. It's got breadboard ends. But I don't know how they must have assembled the table indoors because they couldn't have got it through the door. Very simple. I believe Adrian was a complex person, part of whose complexity was to have a very simple style. Long before simplicity was fashionable, long before Apple or John Mader. It's just Adrian's nature that he liked simple things. I think Adrian had a very good sense of his strengths, his achievements, his place in the history. As a young man, he'd been very ambitious, but he was completely without pretensions, a very endearing trait in someone of his accomplishments and eminence. So here we are looking at the cathedral at Chartres, mind-blowing experience. The guy on the left is an English-speaking guide. There's René Cafanta from the German company, Adrian, Sherry Cohn, Simone behind, and me. We're obviously gobsmacked looking at the cathedral. This is a picture of the Labyrinth on the floor of Chartres Cathedral. It's been there since, I think, 1200s. It's big, it's 40 feet across. Adrian loved this thing, and he gave us each a copy of this. You can buy this print in the cathedral bookstore. And here we are all walking through the fields going to dinner, I think. Simone in the front. Someone, I'm ashamed to say, I can't remember his name. Sherry, Mike, Adrian, me behind Adrian having what looks like a very bad hair day, and Horst Heidehoff on the right. I remember a meal of quail stuffed with corn that was sublime. Here's one of our planning meetings, this one on Long Island, a very nice house we borrowed. Lorna Shanks on the left, Renee again, Horst again, Adrian, Sherry, me evidently taking notes. So a different ambience from, oh God, from this. Stop it. Different dress code. Both type meetings, by the way. This one, don't be fooled, this was the mid-70s, which were great times for type. Type was very profitable. Libraries were being built. We sat around at these meetings and made plans and executed them. It was a very good period. Another digression. I think Charles Peño had an interesting life. I hope he did. He gave a talk in his later years in London, and John Dreyfus helped him sort of prepare the text. And before the talk, John said to me that he had persuaded Charles to remove from the talk all the references to his friendship with Jean Cocteau and to automobile races across France with Picasso, and just talk about type. And I thought, oh God, I want to hear about automobile races with Picasso. Who won? We'll never know. I knew him slightly, Charles Peño. I wish I'd known him better. So here's Adrian. This is again up at Mike's place, another one of our meetings at Coleraine. What he thinks he's doing, I don't know. He's evidently taken into his head to mow the meadow up there, and Mike is trying to get old Smokey the tractor fired up, with success, apparently. Look at this. Here he goes, It's not what you expect from Adrian. A-Type I was in Paris in 1989, and Adrian gave a party at his studio. I went down with some friends, and when we got there, Adrian was there to greet us, and there was a table in the hall with a whole lot of envelopes on it, just very plain envelopes like this, nothing written on them. And we were each invited to take one at random. It was a party favor. And inside each, Adrian had drawn a symbol, each one different. There were no two alike. So I opened my little card, and this is what you saw. Well, I saw. So I said to Adrian, that's very nice. What is it? And he said, it's the ancient Chinese symbol for a cart. And I said, wait a minute. I said, I'm a carter. And he just sort of smiled. My moment of Zen. I think the Chinese still use it, but the different way up. I think it means a car nowadays, I think, still in use. So one last anecdote. Adrian taught, as I said, and I got to hear that he had a very promising student, type design student. I don't think I ever met him, but I knew his name at the time. And this student had invited Adrian and Simone to a religious service the following Sunday. And Adrian said they were going to go. So when I saw Adrian the following week, of course, I said, how was the service? And he said it was very good. It was very interesting. We were glad we went. But, said Adrian, I realized that the student will never be a type designer. What do you mean? I said, I thought he was very talented. And Adrian said, oh, he is. But when I saw him on Sunday, I realized that his religion was the most important thing in his life. Well, Adrian was a good judge of character. I don't know what happened to the student. I hope he's an archbishop, but he never became a type designer. I tell you that anecdote because I think it says a lot about Adrian's own devotion to his calling of type design. And I don't mean to off-put any aspiring type design students here who might have other interests, but type design can be a jealous god, but not an unkind one. I'd be happy to answer questions.
What is the most beautiful type?
I saw that coming, thank you. Yeah, I'm someone who does see beauty in typefaces. I mean, I can get choked up over Times Roman. I mean, I have at home a page, a folio page from a big Bible printed by the Imprimerie Nationale, I don't know, 17th century, set entirely in Garamond's Gros Canon. And I have it framed, but I cannot put it on the wall because if I look at it, I swoon. I mean, it's just so beautiful. I can't take it. If I had to choose a contemporary type designer in whose work I find, you know, the eye of this beholder finds the most beauty, it would be Adrian's work, I have to say. I do find his faces extremely beautiful. Hard for me to pick one to answer your question, but yeah, I certainly find type beautiful, and I wish more people did so. There's something, you know, on this subject. It reminds me of something that Buckminster Fuller said, which I like very much, and I think that Milton Glaser must have liked it too, because he put it on the cover of an AIG annual several years ago. What Bucky said was, when I am working on a problem, I never think about beauty. I think only of how to solve the problem. But when I have finished, if the solution is not beautiful, I know it is wrong. I think that's great. And I think Adrian would have liked that as well. So yeah, I think, you know, that expresses, I think, you know, you never sit down and say, okay, I'm going to design a beautiful typeface today. But if it doesn't stand up to some sort of aesthetic feeling that you have, it's probably wrong. So that's the question I knew I was going to get. What? Yes, someone's waving. Yeah.
I think you, hello, great talk. So what I find great about Frutiger is that he often, there's many similarities through most of his typefaces, and that's the simplistic style that he has throughout his body of work. How did you see him experiment and find new faces that all seem to have so much in common with each other?
Yeah, you know, you could roughly divide type designers into two categories, I think. Those that have a very strong personal vision of the alphabet, the Latin alphabet. And this sort of shines through all of their work. And then you have others who are more chameleon-like, and they do different typefaces, and there's really nothing much in common between them. You know, I really sort of do not know the answer to your question of what Adrian's process was. But this anecdote may illuminate it slightly. You know, when I was in Paris once, I was going to some exhibition. I can't remember what it was. One of the museums had an interesting exhibition. I said to Adrian, do you want to go to this exhibition with me? I'm on my way. And Adrian said, no. He said, I don't really like going to exhibitions, he said. I have so much imagery already in my mind waiting to come out. There isn't any room for any more to go in. So obviously when he was a student, he was very receptive to other images. But by the time I knew him, in his late 30s, his batteries were fully charged, and they remained that way for the rest of his life. And that, I think, is, I mean, that's, to me, a sort of sign of genius. I mean, if everything you need to do your work is in a sort of internal resource, and you don't need stimulus from the outside, I think you're a genius. You know, Adrian's process, I showed you a number of different processes that came about. But he was, you know, I mean, he made letters the whole time, by whatever means he could. And out of that came some designs that were produced, and others that, as I showed you, were not produced, although I certainly think some of them deserved to be. you should, I can't really see you out there, so if anyone's got a question, you should yell. No? Okay.
Well, they had been fantastic, so thank you so much for coming this evening, and thank you, Adrian. Good night.